I moved to the city for college and resided in the school dormitory. That night, while I was going around the dormitory, I saw a lot of smoke. Someone was burning something, and the scent of smoke made me cry. Going a bit further, I noticed an old lady in an alley near the dormitory burning joss paper on the ground. Curiosity piqued. I opened my eyes to take a closer look because she appeared to be doing something other than burning joss paper. She was wearing slippers and was continuously banging on something. That was strange to me since I'd never seen anything like it before. Curiosity caused me to pause and take a closer look since she sat with her back to the entrance, and I wondered what she was doing. So I lifted my body to improve my vision. The more I stared at it, the more terrified I became. The old lady kept banging on the item while murmuring as if she was casting a spell, which was terrifying. And then I realized what she was striking on was a paper doll. It was carved in the shape of a human, laid on the ground and beaten mercilessly. I mustered the guts to approach her and listen to what she was saying. She abruptly turned around and stared at me, her expression frightening. I was startled and terrified at the moment because I was afraid of what she would do to me, so I hurried out of there. I was not sure why I was so afraid of an old woman. Out of the alley there were many other people sitting on the street doing the same thing, which made me ponder a lot at this time. I'd been walking for a while, thinking all the way, and arrived to the dorm without noticing. When I arrived at my room, my roommate, Jan, saw that I was sweating and taunted me whether I had just returned from a date with my girlfriend, that I looked so weary. I immediately wiped away my perspiration, recovered my calm, and informed him that I had just witnessed something terrifying. Then I told him what I had seen earlier. On the contrary to what I expected, when I finished, he stated that this was a typical activity. Seeing this, I inquired more directly about the questions that had been bothering me all along. He said it was an annual ceremony to eliminate inducement curses which the elders generally performed for their offspring. I was even more perplexed after hearing that, since I had no idea what an inducement curse was or why it was performed around this dormitory. Jan told me a story that he had heard and observed here at the time. I was much more terrified now since I had heard him mention that there was an enchantment with dolls in the dormitory previously. He lighted a cigarette slowly and reminisced about a year ago. He was in the same room as the other boys at the time, including two called Zin and Bing. They were cleaning the room as usual that day when Zin walked in from outside. "Hey, did you just get dumped by your girlfriend? Your face looks like a leftover dumpling," said Bing. But Zin was different that day. He pushed Bing aside and ordered Bing not to bother him in an irritated tone. He then went directly to bed. Normally he would never raise his voice in front of his buddies. Jan soothed Bing, then stated that Zin must be exhausted. He didn't mean anything bad. Zin screamed loudly as Jan and Bing were about to turn and go away. Panicked, they turned back and saw Zin clutching his head and crying in agony. It was becoming increasingly shrill, as if he was in a great pain. Jan and Bing saw this and dashed over to have a look. Then they both became incredibly shocked and panicked by what they witnessed. There were large and tiny holes bleeding on Zin's forehead right now. Those holes were progressively becoming larger, more painful and deeper, much like being pricked with a cigarette. Zin writhed on the bed, holding his head and crying out in anguish. He stopped screaming after a while and seemed to be less painful, but his face looked exhausted. When Jan and Bing noticed this, they immediately inquired about his situation. Then stated that he had been exhausted and in agony since proposing to break up with his girlfriend. Sometimes he had stomachache, sometimes a headache, and every time he went to see the doctor said he was normal. and couldn't find any problem. Before he finished speaking, he hastily held his arm, this time because it hurt. What was frightening was that his arm began to twist horribly. I twisted until it began to shatter and turn 360 degrees. You could plainly hear bones fracturing one by one. Yan didn't know what to do when he saw that in front of him, since everything happened all of a sudden. Zin cried in agony. His entire arm was rotated entirely the other direction, making it appear so scary. He painfully gripped his arm and cried. It was horrible to witness this sight right now. Yan believed this was most likely due to someone enchanting him, and Bing agreed. His face was pallid, like a lost soul, and his eyes were filled with blood-red veins. Then he lied down, covered in blankets, threw everyone out and stated he was okay and there was no need to call an ambulance. Because there was an exchange program at the dormitory that night, everyone gathered in a huddle. Everyone gathered in the yard to chat and discuss about their adventures. Suddenly, Yan and Bing overheard some girls who were friends of Zin's lover chatting. Zin's girlfriend seemed to have locked herself in a room all day following their breakup, causing her friends to be concerned as well. Hearing that, Yan and Bing assumed that because they had broken up, it was so sad that it had occurred so terribly. Bing took advantage of the situation. He had a long-standing crush on Zin's girlfriend, so he purchased a box of cakes and went to the girl's room. When he arrived, he saw that the room's door was ajar and that there was a weird noise within. Bing peered inside by mistake, but he couldn't see clearly, so Bing looked through the glass on the door and was going to call her. But on the inside, the girl was sitting on the bed and performing strange things. She grabbed a rag doll and stabbed it repeatedly with something. It turned out that she had punctured the doll's entire forehead with a needle, leaving holes on it. The cloth doll also resembled Zin. She then began to break its legs and limbs out of anger. The doll's arm progressively broke off and finally fell off, twisting and appearing odd. Her face was pallid with malicious purpose and her lips were muttering something extremely frightening. Finally, she rose up and opened the window to the room, dumping the doll out of the window as if she was about to throw it on the ground. She read something on her lips before throwing it, and as she let go, the doll tumbled down. Bing was terrified after seeing everything, so he didn't dare to knock on the door. Then he turned to find Yan, planning to tell him everything. But as soon as he walked down to the yard, he noticed a big crowd. Bing heard from the crowd that someone had committed suicide by leaping from a building, which corresponded with what he had seen earlier, so he trembled a little and prayed it wasn't the case. When he walked in to take a closer look, the image in front of his eyes caused him to be scared to death. Zin was the one who leaped from the floor, and his limbs were shattered much like the doll Bing had seen previously. I began to panic and worry since I hadn't been aware of such a dreadful spell, and I couldn't believe that girl could do such evil things only because of a breakup. And Yan claimed that both the police and the forensics said Zin committed suicide. No one could find out anything, but at the same time, everyone in the school knew, so she moved to the other school afterwards. And the worshippers from earlier did so to break the spell on that doll with a replacement paper doll. This strange thing happened in a small village where I lived. In the middle of my village, there was a well that was used by the whole village. The water was very close to the well's mouth, so it was very convenient for people to get water. In the past, this well was used by the whole village to get drinking water, but later it seemed that someone drowned, so even though the body was recovered, the villagers never dared to drink the well water again. However, because the well's water was very clear and still as sweet as before, most people in the village used well water to wash vegetables and wash clothes. This well could be considered the most vibrant place in the village. It was also an ideal place for our children to play. Back then, when we played water guns in the groups after school, the water gun was made by ourselves using bamboo tubes and wooden sticks. Water was continuously pumped into the gun from the well. Every time I played water gun with my friends, when I came home, my mother scolded me. My mother didn't like me playing near that well. And that day, because I was so happy with my friends, I played games all afternoon. My whole body was drenched, so I could only bow my head to apologize for my mother with an attitude of remorse. Although I admitted my mistake on the surface, I didn't mind it at all because we had a lot of fun playing there together. At that time, my family lived with my grandmother, who spoiled me very much. Every time my mother scolded me, my grandmother was always there to protect me. I used to come home late many times, but that day my grandmother was really worried when she heard me going to the well to play. She started pulling me down next to her. Then she told me a strange story that happened at that well. My grandmother told me that in recent years, people often saw a female ghost at the well. It was said that the female ghost was looking for a replacement. It all started about 10 years ago when a woman in the village took a son down to the well to wash clothes. That child was about my age, but he hadn't been to school yet, so he followed his mother to the well every day. That day the woman was doing laundry at the well and the child was playing with a ball near the well, watching the child play happily. Then, when the woman soaked all the clothes, she discovered that she forgot to bring washing powder when she left the house. Because her house was close, the woman let her son play at the well and then ran home to get washing powder. But then, unexpectedly, a sad thing happened. When the woman returned to find her son no longer playing at the well, the boy quickly disappeared without a trace. The mother panicked, worried, and ran to find her child in vain. Although she looked for him everywhere, she couldn't find her son anywhere. At this moment, she suddenly felt a strange feeling coming from the well, as if something urged her on. The mother's hunch told her that something bad happened at the well. The woman looked back over the top of the well and suddenly saw a ball floating in the water. That was the ball her son was playing with just now. A bad feeling suddenly appeared in the woman's heart. She seemed to have a bad premonition about her son. She quickly ran to the mouth of the well. When the woman was in front of the well, she looked down and found her son lying at the bottom of the well. The woman saw her son below. She did not have time to think and jumped down immediately. But by then her son had long drowned and the woman could not swim. Not only was she unable to pick up her son's body, but the woman was also helpless in the well. So the woman and the child both sank into the well. When their bodies were found, it was already the next day. From then on, no one dared to drink the well water. Some people even heard the cry of a woman at the mouth of the well at night because their mother and son died unjustly. After my grandma finished telling this story, I cried at that time. I didn't know why I burst into tears. Maybe I thought that woman and his son were pitiful. My grandmother kindly told me that if something happened to me, everyone would be sad and heartbroken like that woman. That was why my mother told me not to go out there anymore. After hearing the story about the well, I was scared and I didn't go there for quite a while. Until one day, my friends invited each other to play a water gun game. Both of my friends chased each other and played happily, and I felt a little confused. So a guy jumped in and shot water at me, which pissed me off. So I decided to get a water gun and go to the well to pump the water in and start fighting with them. But when I was pumping water, I suddenly noticed a colorful ball floating on the well's surface. That ball was pretty. It caught my attention. The ball was very attractive when gliding back and forth on the well's surface. I didn't know what I was thinking at that moment, and I tried to reach out for the ball. The ball seemed to prevent me from catching it intentionally. It moved away from me a little and it just drifted away. So I leaned forward forcefully. Suddenly I slipped and my body lost its balance. I fell into the well suddenly. It all happened so fast. I fell into the water before I could call for help. The deeper I sank, the narrower the well. I seemed to lose consciousness. After a while of wobbling, I finally turned around. But at that time I couldn't swim and choked on some water. I just felt my body getting heavier and heavier. I was afraid to struggle, but instead of rising, I was sinking more and more. Slowly my eyes began to darken. My mind went blank. At this crucial moment, I suddenly felt a force lifting me from under my feet. At that time I was still awake. I opened my eyes wide and saw that it was a woman coming up from the well. She hugged my legs and kept pushing me up. Immediately after my whole body emerged from the water, I tried to inhale for air. I panted, clutching the side of the well and slowly climbing up. When I looked back into the well, I saw no woman at all, except that below the well was deep water. I didn't know where my friend and the others went. I finally got out of the well and ran home in a soaking wet body. When I got home, I didn't dare say that I fell into the well. My mother thought I was playing with water guns again, so she scolded me even more harshly. But in my heart, I was still very scared. I couldn't hide my thoughts. That night before I went to bed, I told my grandmother the whole story. I told the story clearly that today I accidentally fell into the well. When I was about to drown, a woman at the bottom of the well saved me. Grandma said back then the woman felt guilty for not being able to save her child. And today, she got to wish. She didn't want any more parents to lose their children because they would suffer as much as she did. I couldn't hold back my tears. That poor woman who saved me today made me feel less fear and feel more sorry for her. I had a strange dream that night. I dreamt that the woman and her child were playing happily. It was good that now they could be together and be so happy. Motherhood was truly sacred. The incident happened in 2007. At the time, my friend Gunn and I were transferred to a new construction site in a small town. The two of us shared a dorm with a local named Key. In the evening, Gunn told a story about the woman. One night the woman was passing through a cemetery because she wanted to go to the toilet. She stopped quickly. She panicked when she realized she was urinating on a grave. She went insane and bit her 4-year-old son to death when she got home. Many people in the village witnessed her story and they thought that she was haunted. I had always been fascinated by stories about gods and ghosts, and I was certain she was possessed by the ghost in the grave. At the same time, on the other side, Key laughed loudly. Key said that Gunn just made up the story. Gunn's story had not been verified by anyone. I also had a question. Gunn only heard from other people, so had he ever witnessed the story with his own eyes? Gunn heard Key saying what he said was made up to scare people. Gunn was a bit unwilling. Gunn scolded Key and challenged Key to tell a true ghost story. Key saw Gunn angry. Key was a little funny, so he asked Gunn if Gunn wanted to hear a true story. I paid attention to Key's voice. He appeared to be aware of something, so he stood up and told us. Key said that there were demons right here in the town. He stopped and said with a serious expression that someone raised ghosts in the town. I had never heard of it before. Gunn didn't believe Key's story and thought that Key was bragging. Key was excited after hearing Gunn say he was bragging. He said there was a pond west of the dam where there was a very strange guy with a ghost on his body. When Key finished talking, looking at our unbelievable expressions, he said he would take us to see the strange man at midnight. With the expectation of mysteries, we all eagerly waited until midnight to find out the truth of Key's story. At precisely 12 o'clock at night, the three of us went into the direction that Key had indicated to see if the man raising the ghost was real or not. The midnight weather was quite cold. "Hey, it hasn't come yet. Why is it taking so long? Are you on the wrong path?" asked Gunn impatiently. Key was a local and he knew the terrain well, so we didn't ask much. "Don't worry, we're almost there. In front of us," Key reassured. We took 2 turns in a narrow alley. The surrounding space was extremely quiet. The area had a lot of abandoned houses and they were waiting to be demolished. Key stopped and said, "You see, the guy is living in the dilapidated house over there." Key, seeing Gunn's bewildered expression, asked him if he was afraid, and if he was, it wasn't too late to return. Gunn tried to be brave. He continued to ask Key to lead the way. So we continued to approach the old house. When we reached the wall of the old house, Key stopped and told Gunn and I to stay behind him, signaling us to be quiet. The 3 of us leaned softly against the wall below the window. We couldn't hear anything inside. Key grabbed both hands on the window sill and stretched his head inside to look. Gunn and myself were also curious. We followed Key to the window to look inside. The light in the room was dim. There was no furniture in the house. There was only a musty smell. The smell mixed with a stench. There was a person in the room. He was sitting with his back towards us. The man just sat motionless and bowed his head. After bowing and sitting motionless for 7 or 8 minutes, all of a sudden the man started shaking his shoulders and he sobbed softly. The 3 of us were unsurprised. We only heard the man mumbling something very low. I thought the man might be mentally ill, so he sat around talking nonsense in the middle of the night. I was confused and turned to ask Key who was he talking to. Today was also the first time Key saw him. The guy lived alone. Maybe he was talking to a ghost, but we just didn't see the ghost. At the same time, Gunn suggested us to go around the opposite window so we could see the man's face. Key and I agreed with Gunn's approach. We were all driven by curiosity. Because many houses were demolished, we walked carefully to avoid making any noise. Key was the first to stand on the windowsill to look inside the house and the direction. Since the window was facing the front of the man, we were afraid of being discovered, so Key went up first to see who the man was actually talking to. Key glanced into the room, his body trembling as if he had seen something terrible, and he almost cried out. Key became terrified and withdrew from the window. Gunn and I hurriedly asked him what he saw, but Key just covered his mouth with both hands as if he was about to vomit. Key turned to cover his mouth and ran away. He started vomiting. When we saw Key running away, Gunn and I became even more curious. We couldn't contain our curiosity. Myself and Gunn climbed up the window. Then we saw a scene that we couldn't forget ever in our lifetimes. The man's shirt was opened. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. The man looked thin. He was holding chicken legs in his hand. And there was a face on his stomach. And the face was eating the chicken leg in his hand with its mouth. The face was making a rustling sound. We saw a few bloody animal carcasses still scattered on the ground. All of a sudden, the face on the man's stomach stopped chewing. His face looked at me and Gunn with blood-red eyes. He spotted us. We screamed and fell from the window. The horrible image made us dizzy. As we sat on the ground, we forgot the way back.
"Catch them and don't let them run,"
a voice cried from within. The voice didn't belong to the man, so it could only have been from the face. I had never seen and thought that there would be such a strange thing in the world. Key was vomiting next to us. He immediately dragged me and Gunn away, and we ran back to the dorm without daring to look back. The next day, we told colleagues in the technical team about the story last night. Many people did not believe us, so they came to the old house again. But the house was empty. They only saw the corpses of many animals. There were some local people talking about the incident. They said the man had a strange lump on his stomach. Some others said he was possessed by demons. And at last, I still didn't know what he was. Shen and I have been close friends since we were children, and one day while we were playing, I senselessly asked about Shen's family. Because the Shen family was the wealthiest in the area as a result of selling tofu for many generations. Shen stated that his great-grandfather Jin started his career without any resources, and there was a thrilling story that had been passed down in the Shen family until now. Shen then began telling me the story. He also told me not to tell anyone about the story, which piqued my interest even more. Shen's great-grandfather Jin worked as a hired worker for other people when he was young. His life was very difficult and poor. Jin's daily job was simply mowing the lawn or doing other jobs that people hired him for. Jin married after a while as well. Soon after, they had a child, and that was now Shen's grandfather. Because life was too difficult, Jin devised a business plan to help his family. He saved up and purchased a bag of fresh soybeans. His business plan based on a tofu recipe taught by Jin's mother in the past. He ground these beans to get water. Back in the day, people cooked milk with soybeans mainly. With Jin's heirloom recipe, the bean paste quickly solidified into a large, soft mass that looked very delicious. Jin initially offered to sell to local households, but because they were unfamiliar with the food, they only bought a little at a time. When they returned home, they could make many different delicious and nutritious dishes with the tofu, and Jin's tofu gradually gained popularity. People in the area began to come to Jin for more purchases. Jin suggested to his wife that they open a small shop for business as their business grew better and better. Because their business was doing well, people from other areas frequently came to place orders, and Jin would deliver the tofu to them. Jin was completing an order as usual one day. He needed to transport the tofu to the next village, so Jin woke up early to prepare to go. Because there were no other modes of transportation available at the time, everything was transported by road. But when he arrived, the customer's house was closed and there appeared to be no one living in there, so Jin returned. The couple felt strange, but what concerned them more was that the tofu couldn't be stored for long, especially this was almost all of their tofu for today. But instead of giving up, Jin decided to carry the tofu around and sell it, as well as visit other villages to see if anyone would buy it. So Jin carried the tofu to go once more. It was getting dark now. Jin had gone for a long time but only sold a few of the tofu, and seeing that it was already dark, he was disappointed and was about to return. Jin then noticed from a distance a very large and extremely busy restaurant with many customers coming in and out. Jin was taken aback by how deserted the area was, but this restaurant was doing exceptionally well. Jin turned to leave when he heard a voice calling him from behind. Jin quickly turned around when he noticed the restaurant owner beckoning from a distance. Jin walked over to see what he needed. The owner then offered to buy all of Jin's tofu. Jin was taken aback. Why would a stranger offer to buy himself a whole basket of tofu?
Hello, I'm a friend of your mother, and I heard your tofu is delicious. Just leave it all to me, said the owner.
Accompanied by an invitation to join them for dinner because his restaurant was hosting a party to commemorate a special occasion today, but Jin refused, stating that all he needed to do was carry the tofu inside and return. The owner did not force him at this time. He simply told Jin to carry the tofu to the kitchen and then he could leave. Jin followed the owner inside the large house and went straight to the kitchen. The owner put his hand on Jin's shoulder just as he was about to turn around, intending to keep Jin. He explained that he wanted to invite Jin to dinner to show his admiration. Also, the way back was a bit long and it was already dark, and he saw Jin was very tired. Jin still refused, citing the fact that his family was waiting for him at home. However, the owner was still ecstatic and pushed Jin to the table. Jin was pushed to a dining table with the owner's enthusiasm, and what was in front of him surprised Jin. Because there was such a feast in front of Jin right now, full of fish and meat, which were cooked very attractively, Jin couldn't resist the enticing scent of the food after carrying tofu for the whole afternoon and being exhausted as well. Seeing the increasing number of customers entering the restaurant, Jin initially planned to eat briefly and then leave. Jin devoured a chicken thigh because such a hearty meal was normally difficult to have. Jin looked around for a while of attentive eating and noted something was wrong. Jin looked at the people next to him. They didn't talk at all, and they didn't even eat. He took the initiative to start a conversation, but they did not respond. Jin reasoned that they didn't like him because he didn't pay for the meal. Looking back, the restaurant's owner was seated with other customers. Jin was a little embarrassed because he had been invited to eat such delicious food like this for free. As a result, Jin decided to bring a cup of tea to the next table to toast with the owner to thank for treating him so well. Jin attempted to speak and thank him when he arrived, but the owner did not respond. He was sitting still, neither eating nor responding to Jin. Jin noticed something odd and asked if the owner thought he was a jerk because he ate without paying. But no matter how many times he asked, the owner sat motionless. Jin took the initiative to call him because he thought it was too weird, but as soon as he walked over to touch the owner, Jin was startled by what he saw. All of the dishes on the table in front of the owner and his guests. There was no meat or fish at all, only worms and maggots on the plates. And they were still alive, crawling around on the plates and on the table. Other foods were simply soil and worms. Jin panicked at this point and the owner slowly turned around. Jin screamed in terror when a skull full of maggots appeared. Jin was so terrified and panicked,
He took a step back and attempted to flee, but tripped. Jin fainted after his head hit the ground, and he had no idea what had happened. Not sure how long Jin was unconscious, but when he awoke, he saw a large crowd in front of him. He opened his eyes slowly to see better. It turned out to be his wife and some close neighbors. Jin was still in shock and was about to tell his wife what he had witnessed. The old man who lived next door quickly stopped him, preventing Jin from speaking. After that, everyone pitched in to help Jin get out of the woods. After that, everyone told Jin that because it was late at night and he hadn't returned, his wife had called some neighbors to look for him. After a while searching around, everyone found Jin lying next to a grave. With his mouth full of mud, Jin heard it and was perplexed. Had he met ghosts? Jin quickly put his hand in his pocket after recalling that they had paid him. Jin took out a bunch of dried leaves. Jin dashed over to check the tofu load because he remembered selling the tofu to those ghosts, and they used the tofu in a variety of delicious dishes. And when he opened it, there was no longer any tofu inside. So what happened to the tofu in the end? Jin's family was very concerned about him after what happened, but Jin insisted that he was fine. Jin simply stated that he was tired and needed to rest. Jin vomited a lot after that because of what he ate, and everything Jin vomited up was mud mixed with tofu. Jin eventually stopped delivering and began to open a restaurant, serving dishes with tofu as the main course. The strange thing was that after that day, Jin's tofu suddenly became more popular and customers were lining up every day. Surprisingly, the idea of opening a tofu restaurant made Jin's business much more convenient. Jin's tofu had almost gotten everyone addicted and crazy. Jin believed he got this idea from his ghost encounter. Soon after, Jin's restaurant appeared like a kite in the wind, and it was soon able to expand into a large store, and Jin became increasingly wealthy. After hearing Shen's story, I began to have strange thoughts. That the tofu pieces my parents bought from the Shen family, which I ate every day, had anything to do with the bugs or the things Jin went through that night. Today we will listen to a horror story that took place in a poor village. The entire village was abuzz about Ken's encounter with ghosts on his way of delivering goods, and his friends couldn't wait to hear him tell the tale. Ken was still scared when he remembered that. One of his friends was taken aback and asked him about what the ghosts looked like. Ken said nothing and simply took another sip of wine before beginning to tell the story. That night, the warehouse where he worked received a large order from downtown. In order to secure the work, the warehouse owner, who was Ken's boss, immediately offered to accompany Ken to the location to check and collect money. The boss was happy to sit next to Ken to show him the way and chat with him along the way. The two dashed out of the village, taking the highway to the town. Because it was dark at the time, the road was devoid of traffic. Ken, however, wanted to finish work early so he could go home and rest, so he drove around the shortcut to get to the town faster. He carried the goods into the warehouse for the purchaser to check when he arrived. Also, he was kind enough to assist him in reordering the goods into the warehouse. The purchaser rewarded him with a separate commission for his diligence and hard work. Everything went swimmingly. Ken continued to drive his boss back to the village after completing his work. The two were sitting in the truck happily conversing with each other. The boss also shown that she appreciated Ken a lot. While their truck was turning to the village road, they saw a young woman was huddled on the side of the road. Despite the fact that she saw Ken's truck approaching, She did not rush to get up. Her behavior was unusual. He was surprised and confused. He wasn't sure whether he should pull over to help this girl. While he was thinking about it, the boss suggested that she would get out of the truck to have a look. This girl might be lost. The boss hastily went down, walking alone to where the girl was sitting, as soon as she finished speaking. With a kind expression, the boss gently asked her a few questions. Ken sat quietly in his truck, fearing of robbers might have jumped out from both sides of the road. But the robbers were nowhere to be found, leaving only the strange girl sitting motionless with her face down. The boss continued to question her, but she did not respond, nor did she show any emotion. She appeared to be deaf. As a result, the boss motioned for the girl to get into the truck and follow her home. The girl then raised her eyes, revealing a pale, cold face. Then, without waiting for an invitation, she stood up and walked straight to Ken's truck. She took the initiative to sit in the back seat, her face solemn, and she said nothing to Ken. The boss got into the truck also. She patiently started a conversation with the girl in the hopes that she would recognize what the girl needed. The quiet atmosphere in the truck, on the other hand, made the two nervous. The truck became cold and thrilling as a result of the strange girl's presence. To avoid making this girl feel uncomfortable, the boss politely asked her for her address so Ken could drive her home first. The girl did not respond, instead silently pointing to the dark space in front of the truck window and remaining silent. Following that, Ken started the engine and decided to follow this girl's instructions. He kept an eye on her because her expression and gestures appeared shady. Ken let the truck turn onto a narrow road with luxuriant weeds on both sides and no one or house lights to be seen. Seeing that lonely road, the boss inquired about her exact home address, but she still did not respond. Ken held all of a sudden before he realized what was going on and what this girl truly required. The boss asked Ken what was wrong. Then she looked ahead at the dense fog in panic. The fog was thickening and covering Ken's truck. The temperature was also colder than it had ever been. Ken took a deep breath and drove slowly through the dense fog. But the deeper he went, the colder and darker the air became. Ken looked worriedly at the boss, perplexed as to why there was such a thick fog in the middle of the summer. The boss, on the other hand, remained calm and told Ken to keep driving and take advantage of the fog to get home. Ken was startled again after a short distance of driving. In front of his truck, there seemed to be a group of people who appeared in the fog with dark and unidentified shapes. Another group of people began to arrive from afar, and the road became even stranger than before. The boss intended to ask these people for directions. But when she looked outside, she noticed that they appeared so strange, with a worn and mysterious gait. Ken was intrigued by the boss's sudden trembling. He turned to ask his boss what she was looking at outside and discovered some weird things as well. In that dense fog, a crowd of people, young and old, man and woman, appeared out of nowhere. They had white eyes, no irises, and looked like zombies. The boss quickly closed the truck window and crouched inside because she was certain they had encountered ghosts. Ken was befuddled right now. He didn't understand how he could get lost on this path. Seeing how urgent the situation was, and knowing that continuing on this road was impossible, the boss immediately told Ken to turn the car around and take another route. The boss just remembered there was a girl on the back seat. Maybe she could show them the way out. But just as the boss was about to turn around to ask the girl sitting behind her burst out in a horrible, creepy laughter. The girl's face instantly changed into a ghostly smile. Both Ken and the warehouse owner seem to be caught in a trap that has been set for them, with no idea how to get out of it. The scene outside had changed slightly at this point. Those strange people abruptly changed course and gathered around Ken's truck. Some people were standing close to Ken's truck window, revealing terrifying, ghostly faces. They howled like wolves and bared their fangs, as if they wanted to devour the boss and Ken. The others were also present right away, groaning and shaking Ken's truck incessantly, making him extremely terrified. Ken was aware that he had encountered evil spirits at this time, and he wanted to start the engine, but the truck would not start. The boss panicked, looked down at the girl sitting in the back of the truck, terrified and enraged, and howled loudly at her. This young girl abruptly raised her head and gazed at the boss with a soulless, expressionless sight. Then she transformed into a small, cold whirlwind that swirled around in the truck. The back door opened and the girl vanished in a brief moment. They were both stunned and then slowly regained their composure and looked at each other as if they had realized something. The boss looked out the window at the same time. Outside, the fog had dissipated, as had the evil spirits. The boss looked at Ken in horror, thinking that those ghosts were most likely looking for the girl. Ken quickly drove the truck back to the village to ensure safety. Ken's friends panicked after hearing what he had to say and asked him about what he was going to do next. Ken developed a bad fever after returning home. Then, through research, Ken discovered that it was the souls of a big family who was involved in an accident in that foggy area. Anyone who ever crossed that path would also be harassed and scared.